Yeah, I mean, I could not care any less about being the favorite or not being the favorite. We all start even par.
Scottie Scheffler, the world's #1 golfer, stood on the flawless greens of Bethpage Black, but his focus wasn't on the next swing. The 2025 Ryder Cup, meant to be a proud clash of continents and a celebration of golf's elite, had spiraled into chaos. The tension in the air was so thick you could feel it pulse through the crowd. Instead of cheers, angry shouts echoed across the fairway. American fans were going off on Rory McIlroy, spewing insults that crossed every line of decency. And right there in front of thousands, Scheffler, the calm, unshakable king of the PGA Tour, did something nobody expected. He turned toward his own crowd, raised his hand, and told them to chill out and show some respect. The silence that followed hit harder than any drive that day. That gesture wasn't just about keeping order, it was a stand. A raw, powerful moment where the quietest man in golf became its loudest voice. Because this wasn't just about rowdy fans, it was about something deeper, something that had been festering inside professional golf for years. A culture of disrespect, a system built to protect reputations, not integrity. The PGA had always handled things behind closed doors. Whispers, warnings, quiet pressure to behave. But when Scheffler faced down his own people, it was obvious the usual control had collapsed. The mask was off, and the sport's polished image was cracking in real time. This was the boiling point of a storm that had been brewing all season. Scottie Scheffler had dominated every tournament, crushed every challenger, but the higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. And now, on that tense afternoon at Bethpage Black, the golden boy of golf was about to learn what happens when winning isn't enough. Earlier in 2025, Scottie Scheffler had the world at his feet after conquering Royal Portrush to claim the Open Championship in Northern Ireland. An incredible win on enemy turf, but what should have been a crowning moment turned sour fast. The local crowd, fiercely protective of their hometown legend Rory McIlroy, didn't exactly roll out the red carpet. Every hole felt like walking through enemy fire. Instead of applause, Scheffler got sarcasm, heckles, and brutal jabs. Fans weren't just cheering for Rory, they were rooting against Scottie. And while he stayed calm on the outside, that pressure was real. Later, in his usual cool-headed way, he said, "People have a tendency to say things that are dumb." But behind that modest line hid a truth. Those insults cut deep. He'd heard words that no athlete should have to shrug off. And though he claimed it didn't break his focus, it clearly left a scar. That week was a crash course in golf's new reality. A game once defined by quiet respect, now tainted by tribal chaos. Fans weren't just picking favorites. They were declaring sides like it was a street rivalry. The message was clear. If you weren't their guy, you were the enemy. Scheffler didn't snap. He didn't rant. He just stored it away. Another reminder that respect in this sport was fading fast. But fate wasn't done testing him yet. Next came the BMW Championship at Caves Valley, another trophy for his unstoppable season. He dominated the field, finishing 4 shots ahead like it was nothing. But even that smooth victory came with drama. During the third round, officials slapped him and his playing partner, Robert McIntyre, with a slow play warning, an accusation that didn't sit right with anyone watching. The tension was rising again, and this time, Scheffler's patience was wearing thin. That so-called warning for slow play? Scheffler didn't hold back. He called it straight up frustrating. It was a perfect glimpse into the PGA's quiet power play. The way they remind even the top dog who's really in charge. Every swing, every second, under the watchful eye of officials timing your every move. It wasn't about fairness, it was about control, image, and keeping everyone in line. But while the PGA obsessed over pace, something far uglier was brewing where the real chaos lived, in the stands. Because when the Ryder Cup rolled into Bethpage Black, all that bottled-up tension finally exploded. The New York crowd came in hot, loud, and unapologetic, turning one of golf's proudest traditions into a full-blown circus. Bethpage had always been infamous for its brutal fans, rowdy, fearless, and ready to push the limits. But this time, they went too far. The European squad, especially Rory McIlroy, became the punching bag for an unrelenting wave of taunts and insults that had nothing to do with golf. It was personal, cruel, and downright ugly. The atmosphere was electric, but poisoned. What should have been a showcase of skill turned into a public meltdown of sportsmanship. And there, standing amid the chaos, was Scottie Scheffler, watching history repeat itself. The same kind of abuse he'd endured in Ireland was now aimed at his rival, and he wasn't having it. He did what no one expected. He turned on his own fans, urging them to chill, to stop the madness. But the twist that shook everyone came next. In a sea of noise and hate, cameras caught his father, yes, his own dad, stepping in and confronting a fan who screamed at McIlroy. No theatrics, no shouting back, just a firm, quiet act of respect in a place where respect had completely vanished. It was shocking, powerful, and painfully human, a moment that cut through the noise like a whisper in a riot. Even Scheffler's mother became part of the story. Her calmness amid the chaos was being praised everywhere. A picture of grace in a storm of noise. Imagine that. The world's #1 golfer, a man at the very top of his game, forced to rely on his parents to bring order to a tournament run by the most powerful organization in golf. That alone said everything. The PGA of America had issued official warnings, but they sounded like whispers in a hurricane. Completely useless. The truth was out. This wasn't just fan misbehavior. It was a full-blown failure of leadership. Things had gotten so bad that a player's family had to do the job of paid officials. The system had collapsed right before everyone's eyes. And when the backlash hit, it hit hard. The wave of shame that followed swept through the sport like wildfire. The master of ceremonies, the same guy who'd been hyping up the crowd and fueling those nasty chants, was suddenly out, forced to resign, a convenient scapegoat for a much deeper cultural mess. The PGA's quiet statement confirming his resignation was basically an admission of guilt, a confession wrapped in corporate language. They didn't need to say the words. Everyone already knew they had lost control of their own event. Then the old guard spoke up, and that's when things got serious. Golf legend Tom Watson, a two-time U.S. Ryder Cup captain, took to social media and didn't hold back. "I'd like to apologize for the rude and mean-spirited behavior from our American crowd at Bethpage," he wrote. And then came the line that echoed across the sport. "As a former player, captain, and as an American, I am ashamed of what happened." That one word, ashamed, hit like a hammer. Even U.S. Captain Keegan Bradley couldn't defend it. He admitted flat out that the fans had gone too far. Soon the U.S. players themselves were lining up to apologize to their European rivals, a gesture that, while necessary, only made the whole thing look even more absurd.
I think at times this year it may have gotten overly frustrated. I think it's just part of the game. I think part of the game is controlling your emotions, is controlling your mind, and I've definitely gotten...
The Ryder Cup had become a moral cleanup job instead of a celebration of golf's greatest stage. They weren't just apologizing for a bad moment. They were apologizing for their own fans. That alone said it all. The bond between player and supporter, once built on respect and pride, was now fractured beyond repair. The worst part wasn't the shouting or the cheap insults. It was the realization that the system itself had completely failed. The soul of golf, the calm gentleman's game, was slipping through its own fingers. When the dust finally settled and Europe lifted the trophy, the spotlight turned, not to the winners, but to the mess left behind. What did all of this say about the future of golf? About what it had become? Scottie Scheffler, by refusing to bite his tongue and by defending his rival, had done something few dared to do. He'd held up a mirror to the sport itself. And what stared back wasn't pretty. This wasn't just about manners. It was about leadership, about the moral compass of a game that used to pride itself on honor. For years, the PGA Tour had been caught in an identity crisis. First, fighting off LIV Golf's money-fueled rebellion, and now staring down a cultural meltdown inside its own walls. The same organization that once scolded Scheffler for playing too slowly now stood helpless as fans hurled abuse that made headlines worldwide. Where were the warnings then? Where were the rules, the order, the accountability? It left everyone asking one brutal question: who's really protecting the game? Because if the world's #1 player, the symbol of calm, grace, and everything golf claims to stand for, had to step in himself just to stop fans from tearing his opponent apart, then the entire structure of leadership wasn't just weak, it was broken. And that's where the real tension started to build. Because once the noise died down, people began whispering about what Scottie Scheffler had really done. Some said he crossed a line by scolding his own fans in front of the world, while others praised him for doing what no official had the courage to do. The debate spread like wildfire. Was he protecting golf's spirit or challenging the system that built him? Behind closed doors, things weren't calm either. Sources close to the PGA hinted that not everyone was happy with Scheffler's stance. Some executives apparently thought he made the organization look weak, like he'd taken their authority right out of their hands. But fans saw it differently. To them, Scottie was the only one with the guts to act when everyone else froze. It was the moment that blurred the line between player and leader, showing that silence was no longer an option. Golf had always been about control, about keeping emotions tucked neatly behind smiles and etiquette. But that mask was cracking fast. And Scheffler, he had become the face of that change whether he wanted it or not. His quiet rebellion wasn't planned, it was instinct, raw and real, and the world noticed. The media couldn't get enough. Headlines called him everything from golf's new moral compass to the man who shamed his own fans. And while Scheffler stayed mostly silent after the Ryder Cup, his silence spoke louder than any interview ever could, because deep down, everyone knew the truth. He had exposed something that couldn't be unseen. The game wasn't just changing, it had already changed. And now the question hanging over every fairway and press conference was simple but explosive. What happens when golf's calmest man becomes its loudest wake-up call? In the weeks that followed, the storm didn't fade. It grew. Every talk show, podcast, and sports panel was dissecting Scheffler's every move. Sponsors were nervous, commentators were divided, and fans were split straight down the middle. Some said he'd saved golf from eating itself alive. Others said he'd opened a door the PGA could never close again. Either way, the damage and the awakening was done. Golf had always been a game of quiet rebellion, but Scheffler's stand had turned whispers into a roar. Players started speaking more freely about fan behavior, about leadership, about how the sport had become more about branding than integrity. You could feel the shift, like the calm before a thunderstorm that everyone knew was coming. Inside PGA headquarters, tension was boiling. Rumors leaked that officials were holding emergency meetings, trying to figure out how to manage the narrative. Some wanted to back Scheffler publicly, others wanted to quietly rein him in. But it was too late. His gesture at Bethpage had already become legend. Clips spreading online like wildfire. Millions watching that moment of defiance again and again, with captions calling it the day golf fought back. Even international players began weighing in. European pros called Scheffler a true sportsman. Others said his actions were a sign the PGA had lost control of its culture completely. Either way, the power balance had shifted. The world wasn't just watching golf anymore, they were watching how golf handled itself. And through it all, Scheffler stayed silent, choosing his peace over publicity. But that silence only made him bigger. The fans who once booed him now cheered his name. The man who tried to calm a crowd had accidentally become a symbol. A reminder that sometimes the quietest voice in the room ends up shouting the loudest truth of all. By the time the year drew to a close, one thing was crystal clear. Golf would never be the same again. The Ryder Cup chaos hadn't just exposed bad behavior, it had cracked open the shiny surface of an entire sport. The world had seen what happened when tradition met reality. And it wasn't pretty. The chants, the shame, the apologies, it all lived online now, looping endlessly like a cautionary tale with Scottie Scheffler at its center. And the irony? The man who never wanted the spotlight had become its brightest flame. Every network wanted him, every journalist wanted a quote, but Scheffler kept it classy. Still no rants, no drama, just the same quiet composure that made his protest hit even harder. His silence wasn't weakness, it was power, a statement that echoed louder than any press release the PGA could draft. Meanwhile, whispers started circling that the PGA would roll out new fan conduct rules for 2026, a move clearly designed to clean up the mess and save face. But people weren't buying it. The damage was deeper than one ugly tournament. It was about trust, about leadership, about whether golf could stay true to its soul in a world that was changing too fast. Rory McIlroy, who'd once been the target of all that venom, reportedly reached out to Scheffler privately, a gesture that reminded everyone what the game was supposed to be about: respect, rivalry, and class. It was poetic, almost cinematic. The two rivals, once divided by a crowd, now connected by the chaos that nearly broke their sport. And as fans looked ahead to the next season, one thought kept echoing across clubhouses, talk shows, and timelines. If Scottie Scheffler could stand up to his own crowd, what else might he be brave enough to challenge next? Make sure to like, subscribe, and share if you're following this saga, because trust me, this story isn't done yet. This whole fiasco ripped the mask clean off the PGA's so-called modern fan experience. In their desperate attempt to make golf feel like a roaring stadium sport, they lost control of the monster they created. What was supposed to be energy turned into chaos, and Scottie Scheffler stood right in the middle of it, refusing to play along. His defense of Rory McIlroy wasn't just about respect. It was a direct challenge to the entire system, a silent demand that the people at the top finally take responsibility. The Ryder Cup at Bethpage Black won't be remembered for incredible putts or clutch shots. It'll be remembered for the lines that were crossed and the silence that spoke louder than the cheers. Scheffler, the man who never wanted to be the center of drama, became the accidental conscience of a sport that had lost its balance. The quiet competitor turned into golf's most unlikely rebel. He didn't hold press conferences, didn't lash out, he just refused to accept the ugliness that had become normal. And in doing so, he forced everyone, from players to executives, to face the truth. Golf had a soul problem, and it wasn't going away until someone called it out. Now, the whole world's watching. Will the PGA finally enforce stricter rules for fans? Will they protect their players instead of pretending everything's fine? Or will golfers once again be left to fight off hostility alone? The next Ryder Cup won't just be about winning, it'll be a test of whether the sport can clean up its own mess. Scottie Scheffler never asked to be a crusader, but his calm defiance lit a fire the PGA can't put out. He proved that the loudest statement in golf doesn't come from a booming drive. It comes from standing your ground when everyone else looks away. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because this story is far from over, and you'll want to be here when the next chapter drops. See you on the next one.